I was folding my daughter's tiny socks when I heard the car pull up outside. It wasn't the sound that made me look up from the laundry basket. It was the silence that followed. In my neighborhood, cars didn't just stop. They parked, doors slammed, people shouted greetings to neighbors. But this car arrived like a predator, quiet and purposeful. Through the thin curtains of my ground floor apartment, I saw it. A black Mercedes, the kind with the chrome details that catch the afternoon sun and throw it back like a challenge. The kind of car that didn't belong on Maple Street, where the vehicles were mostly 10 years old and held together with prayer and duct tape. I put down the sock I was matching. My hands were shaking slightly. 5 years and 3 months had passed since Marcus disappeared. But my body still remembered how to be afraid. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, and even from inside my apartment, even through the smudged glass and cheap curtains, I knew who she was. Keisha, Marcus's older sister. The last time I'd seen her was at the memorial service we'd held 6 months after Marcus vanished, when the police had quietly started using past tense and the insurance company started making noises about closure and payment. She'd hugged me at that service, her expensive perfume overwhelming in its intensity, and whispered that she was sorry, so sorry, and that I should call her if I ever needed anything. Then she disappeared from my life as completely as her brother had. Now she stood beside that Mercedes, removing designer sunglasses with movements so slow and deliberate they felt like a message. She was wearing a red leather jacket that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Gold glinted at her wrists, her throat, her ears. She looked like success, like power, like everything I wasn't anymore. She looked directly at my window. Somehow, she knew exactly which apartment was mine, even though I'd moved twice since Marcus disappeared and never given her my new address. My daughter Zoe was at her afternoon daycare for another hour. The apartment was empty except for me and my racing heart and the mountain of laundry that represented my entire life now. Work, daycare, laundry, sleep. Work, daycare, laundry, sleep. That was it. That was what the past 5 years had been. Keisha walked toward my building, her heels clicking on the cracked sidewalk with the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about turning an ankle in a pothole. She disappeared from view, headed toward my door. I stood frozen in my tiny living room. The knock, when it came, was soft, almost apologetic. Nothing like the woman I'd just watched approach. I opened the door. Keisha. Shayna. She smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. We need to talk. Get in the car. What? Get in the car, she repeated. There's something you need to see. Something about Marcus. My heart stopped. Then it started again, faster, harder. Is he? I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the word. Dead was easy. Dead I'd been living with for 5 years. Dead was the insurance money that had barely covered his debts and funeral costs. Dead was the explanation I'd given our daughter when she asked why Daddy never came home. He's not dead, Keisha said flatly. But you need to see this yourself. I can't explain it standing in your hallway. Get in the car. I should have said no. I should have demanded explanations right there, should have slammed the door, should have called the police or Marcus's mother or anyone who could tell me this was a joke or a mistake or something that made sense. Instead, I grabbed my purse and my phone and followed Keisha to her Mercedes. The interior smelled like new leather and that same overwhelming perfume. The seats were heated even though it was barely autumn. The dashboard looked like a spaceship control panel. I felt like I was sitting in a vehicle from another planet, one where people didn't count pennies to buy bread, or wear the same 3 pairs of work pants until they were thin at the knees. Keisha pulled away from the curb without saying anything. We drove through my neighborhood, past the check-cashing place and the laundromat and the dollar store where I bought most of Zoe's toys. Then we were on the highway, headed east toward the part of the city where I never went anymore. The part where Marcus and I used to live, back when he had a job in finance and I was finishing my business degree and we thought we were building something. Where are we going? I finally asked. You'll see. Keisha, please. You can't just tell me Marcus is alive and then go silent. Where has he been? Why did he leave? Is he okay? Does he know about Zoe? Does he dash? He knows, Keisha cut me off. Her voice was hard. He's always known. The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to stare at her profile, her jaw set tight, her hands clenched on the steering wheel. What do you mean he's always known? I mean exactly that. He knew about Zoe. He knew you were pregnant when he left. He knew everything. The car felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. But the police said they searched everywhere. They said he might have been mugged, or had an accident, or the police believed what they were supposed to believe. Keisha's voice was bitter now. Marcus made sure of that. We pulled off the highway into an area I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw the sign, Riverside Marina. Private dock. Members only. The marina was beautiful in that cold, exclusive way that said ordinary people weren't welcome. Gleaming yachts bobbed gently in their slips. Seagulls wheeled overhead. Everything was white and blue and perfect, like a postcard of a life I'd never get to live. Keisha parked in a spot marked reserved. We got out. She started walking toward the docks without checking to see if I was following. I followed anyway, my cheap canvas shoes whispering against the polished wooden planks. She stopped at slip number 17. There was a boat there, nothing enormous, but clearly expensive. Clean white hull, teak deck, brass fixtures that gleamed in the afternoon sun. The name painted on the stern made my stomach drop, New Horizons. That had been Marcus's favorite phrase. When he talked about his career, about our future, about the life we'd have someday. New Horizons. Always just ahead. Always just out of reach. He's not here, Keisha said. Not right now. But this is his boat. He's owned it for 4 years. I stared at the boat. At the name. At the evidence of a life Marcus had been living while I'd been struggling to keep our daughter fed and clothed and housed. I don't understand. You will. Keisha pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, then held it out to me. Look. The screen showed a social media profile. The name was Marcus Crawford, but the picture was of a man who looked like my husband if my husband had spent 5 years getting tanned and fit and happy. He was wearing sunglasses and a polo shirt, standing on what looked like this very boat. He was smiling. I scrolled down. More pictures. Marcus at a restaurant, raising a wine glass in a toast. Marcus on a beach somewhere tropical. Marcus with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize, both of them laughing. And in the corner of every photo, the location tag. Miami, Florida. He's in Miami, I said dumbly. Most of the time. Sometimes the Bahamas. Sometimes the Virgin Islands. He moves around. Keisha took her phone back. He's living off the life insurance money. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did, and I had to sit down on the dock before my legs gave out. The life insurance. $500,000 that was supposed to pay out to me as his widow once he was legally declared dead. Except he wasn't dead. He'd disappeared on purpose. He'd made it look like something terrible had happened to him. He'd let me suffer and struggle and grieve. He'd let his daughter grow up without a father. Also, he could take that money and go live on a boat in Miami. How? I whispered. You need to sit down for this part. Keisha gestured to a bench further down the dock. We walked there in silence. She sat beside me, not touching, staring out at the water. Marcus had debts, she started. Bad ones. He was gambling online. Sports betting, mostly. By the time he disappeared, he was in the hole for almost $300,000. The kind of people he owed money to were the kind who don't call lawyers. They call debt collectors who break kneecaps. I felt numb. I didn't know. He never said anything. He hid it well. From everyone. Even me for a while. But I'm a forensic accountant, Shayna. It's literally my job to find hidden money trails. When I started noticing weird patterns in my brother's finances, I dug deeper. What I found scared me. She pulled out her phone again, brought up a different document. Bank statements, transaction histories, payment records. The numbers swam before my eyes, but I could see the pattern. Money going out again and again to accounts with anonymous names. Bets placed. Bets lost. He came to me about 8 months before he disappeared, Keisha continued. Told me he had a plan. A way out. He said he'd researched it carefully. There were people who specialized in this kind of thing. Creating new identities. faking disappearances, making it look legitimate enough that insurance companies would pay out. And you let him. I heard the anger in my voice, sharp and sudden. I told him he was crazy. I told him it was insurance fraud and he'd go to prison. I told him he had a wife and a baby on the way. Keisha's voice cracked slightly, but he didn't care. He said he loved you, but he loved being alive more. He said the debt collectors were closing in. He said it was this or they'd kill him and probably hurt you too, just to make a point. So he abandoned us instead. He thought he was protecting you. In his sick, twisted logic, he thought disappearing was the heroic choice. Let you collect the insurance, start fresh, move on with your life. I laughed, and it sounded wild even to my own ears. Move on? Keisha, I worked 3 jobs for 2 years after he disappeared. I lost our apartment. I had to drop out of school. I was sleeping in my car with a baby for 3 months before I could scrape together enough for a security deposit on that place you found me at. And all this time, he's been drinking wine on a boat in Miami. I know. Keisha's voice was tight. Believe me, I know. Then why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me suffer for 5 years thinking my husband was dead? Why did you let Zoe grow up without a father? Why? I couldn't continue. The tears were coming now, hot and furious. Keisha handed me a tissue from her purse. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Harder. Determined. Because I was gathering evidence. And now I have enough to bury him. I looked up at her. She was staring at the water, but her profile was set in stone. For the first year, I didn't know where he was. He'd covered his tracks well. But I kept looking. I have resources, contacts. Eventually, I found him. Once I did, I started documenting everything. Every purchase. Every transaction. Every photo he was stupid enough to post online. Every boat he chartered. Every restaurant he visited. Every woman he dated. Women. The word came out strangled. 3 serious relationships in 5 years. None of them lasted more than a year. He told them all he was a tech entrepreneur, that he'd sold his startup and was living the dream. Keisha pulled out a folder from her enormous purse, handed it to me. It's all in here. 5 years of documentation. More than enough to prove insurance fraud. More than enough to send him to prison for a decade. Maybe longer. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were printouts of bank statements, copies of boat rental agreements, screenshots of social media posts, photos of Marcus with different women in different locations. There were receipts from high-end restaurants and luxury hotels. There were credit card statements showing purchases all over the Caribbean. There was even a photo of him holding a cocktail on a beach at sunset, the caption reading, "Living my best life." I closed the folder. I couldn't look at any more. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve justice. Because Zoe deserves justice. Because what Marcus did wasn't just abandonment. It was theft. He stole from you, from his daughter, from the insurance company, from everyone who loved him and mourned him. Keisha turned to face me fully now. But here's the thing, Shayna. The insurance fraud is a federal crime. The statute of limitations hasn't run out. If we report this to the right people, with this evidence, Marcus goes to prison. But what? But if Marcus goes to prison for insurance fraud, the insurance company will want their money back. All of it. And since you were the beneficiary, they'll come after you for repayment, even though you didn't know it was fraud. You'll be on the hook for $500,000 you don't have. They'll garnish your wages. They'll take everything you own. They'll dash. I'd end up destroyed anyway, I finished numbly. Yes. Keisha's voice was gentle now. Unless we're smarter than that. Unless we do this differently. I looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd picked me up. This woman who'd let me suffer for 5 years. This woman who'd had the power to end my pain and hadn't used it. This woman who was sitting here now, telling me my husband was alive and criminal and living the dream while I'd been living a nightmare. What do you mean, differently? Keisha smiled. It was not a nice smile. I mean, we take him for everything he's worth. And we do it in a way that doesn't leave you holding the bag. We didn't go back to my apartment right away. Instead, Keisha drove us to a coffee shop in the nice part of town, the kind with leather chairs and pastries that cost more than my hourly wage. She ordered 2 lattes without asking what I wanted. I didn't argue. I was too numb to argue. She spread the folder out on the table between us and started going through it page by page. Her forensic accountant brain was fully engaged now, clicking through numbers and dates and connections like she was solving a puzzle. Which, I suppose, she was. Marcus took out the life insurance policy 6 months before he disappeared, she explained, tapping a document. He paid the premiums in full for 2 years up front. That's unusual, but not suspicious on its own. Smart people sometimes do that to lock in rates. But it was part of the plan. Exactly. He wanted to make sure the policy was active and past the contestability period before he vanished. Insurance companies look much harder at claims filed within the first 2 years of a policy. After that, they're more likely to pay out without extensive investigation. I stared at the policy document. My name was listed as primary beneficiary. Under that was a name I didn't recognize, Keisha Crawford. Contingent beneficiary. He listed you as backup, I said. He did, but that was before we had our falling out. Before I told him I wanted nothing to do with his scheme. Keisha's mouth was tight. He probably meant to change it later, but never got around to it. Or maybe he thought I'd be too grateful for the money to ask questions. He always did underestimate me. She pulled out another document. This one was a bank statement in Marcus's name, but an account I'd never seen before. The balance made my eyes water. $374,000. And that was just one account. He's been living off the insurance money, but not all of it. He was smart enough to know he couldn't just blow through $500,000 in 5 years without questions. So he's been investing some, spending some, keeping a rainy day fund. By my calculations, he's still got about $400,000 left across various accounts. That's good for us? That's excellent for us. Because here's what's going to happen. Keisha leaned forward, and I saw something fierce in her eyes. Something calculating and cold. You're going to file for divorce. He's legally dead. He's declared dead. There's a difference. Legally dead would require a body or conclusive evidence. What Marcus has is a declaration of presumed death based on disappearance. It can be reversed if he's found alive, which he is. Very, very alive. My head was spinning. So I file for divorce from a man who's supposed to be dead. Exactly. You file in family court claiming you've discovered evidence that Marcus Crawford is alive and has been living under an assumed identity while defrauding the insurance company and abandoning his family. You petition the court to reverse the death certificate and establish his living status. That alone is going to send up red flags everywhere. Won't that trigger the insurance investigation? Won't they come after me? They will. But here's the beautiful part. Keisha pulled out another document, this one covered in legal language I couldn't follow. I've already spoken to a lawyer, a really good one who specializes in insurance fraud cases. He says that if you're the one who discovers the fraud and reports it immediately, if you cooperate fully with the investigation and can prove you had no knowledge of Marcus's plan, you might be protected under whistleblower provisions. Might be. Nothing's guaranteed. But the fact that you've been living in poverty for 5 years while Marcus has been living it up in Miami is pretty compelling evidence that you weren't in on it. The fact that I have documentation showing you working multiple minimum wage jobs, living in your car, struggling to feed your child, all while Marcus was posting vacation photos online. That's going to look really, really good for you. I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest, something that might have been hope. So we report him. He goes to prison. The insurance company gets their money back. And I what? Go back to my life. No. Keisha's smile was sharp. You do much better than that. Because while the insurance fraud case is federal and will be handled by prosecutors, the divorce is civil. And in a divorce, you get half of everything. Half of all the assets Marcus has accumulated. Half of his hidden accounts. Half of his boat. Half of everything. But the money came from insurance fraud. The money came from a life insurance policy that paid out to you. You then discovered your husband was alive and are returning the money to the insurance company. But any assets Marcus purchased with that money, any investments he made, any property he acquired, that's all marital property, subject to division in divorce. The numbers clicked into place. For $100,000, half of that was $200,000. More money than I'd seen in my entire life. Enough to change everything for Zoe and me. You said the insurance company would want their money back. They will. But here's where it gets interesting. If you cooperate with the investigation, if you help them build the case against Marcus, if you testify against him, the prosecutor might cut you a deal. They might argue that you're also a victim of Marcus's fraud, that you should be allowed to keep some portion of the recovered funds as restitution for the years of hardship you endured as a result of his crime. How much? I don't know. Maybe 20%. Maybe more if we get the right judge. But even if you have to return every penny of the original insurance payout, you still get half of whatever Marcus has left. And I've been tracking his investments. He's actually done pretty well. Some of those accounts have grown significantly. I sat back in my chair, my latte untouched and growing cold. 5 years. 5 years of struggle and pain and believing my husband was dead. 5 years of explaining to our daughter why she didn't have a daddy. 5 years of working myself to exhaustion just to keep a roof over our heads. And all that time, Marcus had been drinking cocktails on a boat. When do we start? Keisha reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Tomorrow. I've already lined up the lawyer. He's expecting us at 9. We'll file the divorce petition and the fraud report simultaneously. Hit Marcus from both sides before he knows what's happening. He'll try to run. He can't. I've been monitoring his accounts. He thinks he's safe, thinks he's gotten away with it. The moment we file, the court will freeze all his assets. He won't be able to access a single penny. He'll be stuck in Miami with nothing but the clothes on his back and a lot of explaining to do. I thought about that. About Marcus waking up to find his perfect life collapsing around him. About him realizing his sister had betrayed him, his wife had found him, his crime had caught up with him. It felt good. Really, really good. There's one more thing, I said slowly. Zoe. She thinks her father is dead. This is going to bring everything back up. She's going to have questions. Hard questions. Keisha nodded. I know. We'll need to be careful about how we handle it. Maybe have a child psychologist on hand. Make sure she has support. But Shayna? Eventually, she deserves to know the truth. She deserves to know that her father didn't die. He chose to leave. And she deserves to know that her mother fought like hell to get justice for both of them. I picked up my latte, took a sip. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. Tomorrow at 9, I confirmed. Tomorrow at 9, Keisha agreed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed in my tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the folder of documents locked in my closet. Thinking about Marcus's face in those photos, tan and happy and free. Thinking about Zoe, asleep in the next room, dreaming innocent dreams that were about to be shattered. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and made tea. Sat at my kitchen table in the dark. Opened my laptop. I typed Marcus's name into the social media search bar. His profile came up immediately. No privacy settings at all. He wanted people to see his life. Wanted them to admire it. I scrolled through 5 years of photos. 5 years of his new life. The life he'd built by destroying ours. There were photos of sunrises and sunsets. Photos of expensive meals and exotic beaches. Photos of him with different women. All of them beautiful and carefree and oblivious to who he really was. But there were no photos of his daughter. Not one. Not a single mention of the child he'd left behind. It was like Zoe didn't exist. Like I didn't exist. Like the 7 years we'd been married had been completely erased from his history. I thought about what Keisha had said. That Marcus believed he was protecting us by disappearing. That he thought abandonment was somehow heroic. But looking at these photos, I didn't see a man who'd sacrificed himself for his family. I saw a man who'd chosen himself. Who'd decided his own freedom was worth more than his daughter's father. Who'd decided his own happiness was worth more than his wife's sanity. I closed the laptop. Went back to bed. This time I slept. The lawyer's office was in a downtown high-rise, all glass and steel and views of the city I'd once called home. Keisha and I sat in a conference room with leather chairs and a table so polished I could see my reflection in it. I looked tired, worn, old before my time. The lawyer's name was Richard Chun, and he was exactly what I expected. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of man who could smell weakness and exploitation from a mile away. Mrs. Crawford, he began, and I almost corrected him to remind him I'd been using my maiden name for years, but I stopped myself. For this to work, I needed to be Mrs. Crawford, Marcus's wife, the woman he'd abandoned. Yes, I've reviewed the evidence Miss Crawford provided. It's compelling, very compelling. I believe we have an excellent case for both the divorce petition and the fraud report. He spread several documents across the table. But I need to be very clear about what you're walking into here. I'm listening. This is going to be messy. Very messy. The insurance company is going to investigate you thoroughly. They'll audit your finances, interview everyone you know, look for any evidence that you were complicit in the fraud. Your life is going to be under a microscope for months, possibly years. I have nothing to hide. That's good. But it's still going to be invasive and uncomfortable. And there's a possibility, small but real, that they'll try to prosecute you anyway. Claim you should have known. Claim you should have asked more questions. Insurance companies don't like paying out $500,000, and they really don't like getting defrauded. They'll be looking for someone to punish. Will I go to jail? Almost certainly not. The evidence that you're a victim here is too strong. But there's a chance you could face civil penalties, fines, repayment obligations. It's hard to say for sure until we see how the investigation unfolds. Keisha leaned forward. What about the divorce settlement? If Shayna has to return the insurance money, can she still claim half of Marcus's remaining assets? Yes, the divorce is separate from the criminal case. Marital property is marital property, regardless of how it was acquired. Marcus might argue that the assets should be exempt because they're proceeds of crime, but I doubt that argument would succeed. He chose to spend the fraudulent insurance money on building a new life. The wife he abandoned is entitled to half of that new life. How long will it take? Richard Chin considered. The divorce, once we establish Marcus is alive and serve him with papers? 6 months to a year, depending on how much he fights it. The criminal case will take longer. Federal prosecutions move slowly. Could be 2 or 3 years before it's fully resolved. And in the meantime, we freeze all his assets. He can't access any of his accounts, can't sell the boat, can't liquidate investments. He's essentially broke until this is resolved. Richard smiled slightly. Based on the lifestyle Miss Crawford has documented, I'd say Marcus is about to have a very difficult transition back to reality. I thought about that. About Marcus trying to pay for his expensive marina slip with frozen accounts. About him trying to explain to his girlfriend why he suddenly couldn't afford restaurants or drinks or trips. About him realizing that the perfect life he built was a house of cards and it was all coming down. Let's do it, I said. We filed the paperwork that afternoon. Divorce petition, fraud report to the insurance company, criminal complaint to the federal prosecutor's office. All of it coordinated, all of it simultaneous, designed to hit Marcus from every direction at once. Richard had warned me it might take a few days for the paperwork to reach Marcus, for the asset freeze to go into effect, for the investigations to begin. But he'd underestimated how fast things can move when there's $500,000 of fraud involved. By the next morning, I had 3 voicemails from the insurance company. By noon, the FBI had called to schedule an interview. By evening, I had a message from a number with a Miami area code. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. I listened to the voicemail in my car, sitting in the parking lot of Zoe's daycare, not quite ready to go in and pretend everything was normal. Marcus's voice was the same. Deep, warm, the voice I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. The voice that used to tell me everything would be okay. The voice that had told me he loved me the night before he disappeared. Shayna, it's me. I know you know by now. I know you filed the paperwork. I know what Keisha told you. A pause. Heavy breathing. He sounded panicked. Good. Look, I need you to understand. I didn't have a choice. The people I owed money to, they were going to kill me. Kill us. I did this to protect you. To protect Zoe. I thought if I disappeared, if you could get the insurance money, you'd be safe. You'd be taken care of. I did it for you. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Harder. More like the Marcus who'd made the choice to abandon us in the first place. You need to stop this. Right now. Call off the divorce. Tell the insurance company it was a mistake. Tell them you were confused, that someone showed you fake photos or something. I'll make it worth your while. I have money, a lot of money. I can send you cash, untraceable, enough to set you up for life, enough to give Zoe everything she needs. Just call this off. A third pause. Then, quietly, almost pleading, please, Shayna, don't do this to me. I'm your husband. I'm Zoe's father. We're family. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The message ended. I saved it, forwarded it to Richard Chun. Then I deleted Marcus's number from my phone and went inside to pick up my daughter. The FBI interview happened 3 days later. 2 agents, 1 male and 1 female, both polite and professional, and clearly very interested in Marcus's case. They asked me to walk them through the day he disappeared, the months that followed, my financial situation, my relationship with Marcus before he vanished. I told them everything. About the gambling debts I hadn't known about the insurance policy I hadn't asked for, about the memorial service and the grief counseling and the years of barely surviving while Marcus drank cocktails in Miami. They asked if I'd had any contact with Marcus since he disappeared. I played them the voicemail. Watched their faces get very serious. He's attempting witness intimidation, the female agent said. That's another charge right there. Will he go to jail? I asked. If we can prove everything? Yes. Insurance fraud at this level is a federal felony. He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. More if we add the witness intimidation charge. Good, I said. And I meant it. Marcus tried to call 17 more times over the next 2 weeks. I didn't answer. He sent emails, text messages, a telegram bizarrely. Each message followed the same pattern. First apologetic, then angry, then pleading, then threatening. The voice of a man watching his world collapse and desperate to stop it. I forwarded everything to Richard and the FBI agents. Every word Marcus said was more evidence. Every threat was another charge. He was building his own prison cell, one panic message at a time. The asset freeze went through. Richard called to tell me Marcus's accounts were locked down tight. No access to his money, his investments, his boat. The marina had already contacted authorities about unpaid docking fees. The credit cards were declined. The bank accounts were frozen. According to Richard's sources, Marcus tried to charter a flight back to the mainland under his assumed name, but his credit card was declined. He tried to rent a car. Declined. He tried to check into a hotel. Declined. Within a week of the asset freeze, Marcus Crawford was effectively homeless in Miami. He'll try to get back here, I told Keisha. We were sitting in her car outside a family court building, waiting for a hearing on the divorce petition. He'll hitchhike, or take a bus or something. He'll come back to try to fix this. Let him try, Keisha said grimly. The moment he shows up in this state, the FBI has a warrant ready. They'll arrest him on sight. Will they tell me? When they arrest him? Richard said they'd notify us immediately. You're a key witness. You'll need to testify at his trial. I thought about that. About standing in a courtroom and telling a jury what Marcus had done. About looking him in the eye while I explained how he'd abandoned our daughter. About making sure he understood, really understood, what he'd stolen from us. I couldn't wait. 6 weeks after Keisha showed up in that Mercedes, Marcus came home. Not to Miami. Not to the life he'd built there. He came back to our city, desperate and broke and cornered. The FBI arrested him at a bus station. He'd been trying to get to Keisha's house, probably to beg her to help him to fix the mess he'd made. He didn't make it past the parking lot. I got the call from Richard at 4 in the afternoon. He's in custody. They got him about an hour ago. He's being processed now. Arraignment is tomorrow at 9. Will he get bail? Doubt it. Flight risk, history of deception, $500,000 in fraud. Judge would have to be crazy to let him out. Good. I picked up Zoe from daycare that evening. She was 5 years old, bright and sweet, and growing up without any memory of her father. She chattered about her day, about the pictures she'd colored and the games she'd played and the friend who'd shared cookies at snack time. I listened and nodded and felt something heavy lift from my chest. Marcus was in jail. The money would come back to us, at least some of it. The divorce would go through. We'd start fresh, really fresh, with actual resources instead of just survival. Most importantly, Zoe would grow up knowing the truth. Not now, she was too young. But someday I'd tell her about her father's choices, about the man who loved himself more than his family, about the justice her mother fought for and won. And she'd know she came from strength, from resilience, from a woman who refused to stay broken. The trial took 18 months. Federal prosecutions moved slowly, lots of motions and hearings and delays. But eventually we got our day in court. I testified for 4 hours, walked the jury through our marriage, Marcus's disappearance, the years of hardship that followed. I showed them my tax returns, my work history, my bank statements. Showed them the studio apartment I'd been living in while Marcus posted vacation photos. Showed them pictures of Zoe growing up without a father while her father drank wine on a boat. The jury looked angry. That was good. Marcus's defense attorney tried to paint him as a desperate man who'd made a terrible choice under pressure. Tried to argue that the gambling debts were real, that the threats were real, that Marcus genuinely believed disappearing was the only way to protect his family. Then the prosecution played the voicemail where Marcus tried to bribe me into dropping the charges. Played the emails where he threatened to make me sorry if I testified. Showed the jury the social media posts where Marcus bragged about his self-made success. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Found him guilty on all counts. Insurance fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to 14 years in federal prison. No parole. I cried when I heard the verdict. Not because I felt sorry for Marcus, but because it was finally over. The divorce settlement came through 6 months after the criminal trial. Richard had done his job well. I got half of everything Marcus had left. After the insurance company took back their payout plus penalties, after the legal fees and court costs, after everything was said and done, I walked away with $137,000. It wasn't the fortune I'd imagined, but it was more money than I'd ever had in my life. More than enough to change everything for Zoe and me. I used some of it to put a down payment on a small house in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Used some to go back to school and finish my business degree. Used some to start a college fund for Zoe. Put the rest in savings for emergencies and the future. For the first time in 6 years, I could breathe. Keisha and I met for coffee 6 months after Marcus's sentencing. Not at the fancy place downtown. At a regular coffee shop in my neighborhood, the kind where coffee costs $3 and comes in a paper cup. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Good. Really good, actually. Zoe's thriving. I'm almost done with school. We have a home. I have a job that doesn't make me want to cry. Things are stable. That's all anyone can ask for." We sat in silence for a moment. I'd been thinking about something for months, and I finally had to ask. "Why did you wait so long? To tell me about Marcus? You said you found him after a year, but you didn't tell me for 4 more years. Why?" Keisha looked into her coffee cup. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "Because I needed to be sure. Not just that I had enough evidence, but that you'd be protected. If I told you right away, if we'd reported him with less documentation, the insurance company might have been able to argue that you should have known sooner, that you were negligent. They might have been able to go after you harder. So you waited until the case was airtight. I waited until you couldn't possibly lose. Until there was no way they could blame you or punish you, or take anything more from you." She looked up at me. "I know it was horrible. Watching you struggle. Knowing I had information that could help but not being able to use it yet. But I needed you to be safe. Your family. You're the mother of my niece. I wasn't going to let you get destroyed just to get revenge on my brother." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you. For all of it. For being patient. For getting justice. For giving Zoe and me a chance at a real life. You would have found a way regardless. You're strong, Shayna. Stronger than Marcus ever understood. Stronger than I gave you credit for at first. I didn't feel strong. The strongest people never do. They just keep going anyway." 5 years after that day, Keisha showed up in her Mercedes. I graduated with my business degree. Zoe sat in the audience, 10 years old and proud, holding a sign that said, "That's my mom." Keisha sat next to her, cheering louder than anyone else when my name was called. I walked across that stage in my cap and gown, accepted my diploma, and looked out at my daughter and my friend and thought about the life we'd built from the ruins Marcus left behind. It wasn't the life I'd planned. It wasn't the life I'd dreamed of when I married Marcus all those years ago. But it was mine, earned through struggle and pain and choosing again and again to keep going even when it seemed impossible. Marcus, as far as I knew, was still in federal prison. He'd have another 8 years to serve. I'd heard through Keisha that he'd tried writing letters to Zoe, trying to explain himself, trying to build a relationship with the daughter he'd abandoned. I'd thrown every letter away unopened. Maybe when she was 18, I'd let Zoe decide if she wanted contact with him. But until then, she deserved peace. She deserved to grow up knowing she was loved and wanted and worth more than any insurance policy, or gambling debt, or perfect life in Miami. Sometimes I thought about that day. The Mercedes pulling up outside my apartment. Keisha's impossible words, he's not dead. I thought about how close I'd come to just going along with it. To believing Marcus was truly gone. To never knowing the truth. To letting him win. But I hadn't. I'd gotten in that car. I'd listened to Keisha's plan. I'd fought for justice. I'd refused to be a victim. And in the end, I'd won. Not because I got rich or got revenge or saw Marcus punished. I'd won because I'd survived. Because Zoe and I had built a life together. Because we turned abandonment into strength and betrayal into resilience and pain into the foundation of something better. That Mercedes ride had changed everything. Had taken me from the lowest point of my life and set me on a path to becoming someone I'd never imagined I could be. Someone who didn't need Marcus Crawford at all. Someone who was going to be just fine. Better than fine, actually. I was going to be great. And I was going to make sure my daughter knew that no matter what happened, no matter who abandoned her or betrayed her or tried to break her down, she could always get back up. Just like her mother did. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.